Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Brad. What's going on tonight?
Not much, man. Just a good day today. Where the wife's upgrading her whip, so we test drove a couple vehicles, looking at how much those vehicles are going to cost, and it's a daunting thing. But I'm doing well, man. How are you?
What kind of vehicles are you looking at?
Just like third row SUVs, mommy mobiles, the Palisades and Kia Telluride to the world.
There you go.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, things are good over here. I actually just started a new job this week, so it's been a lot of onboarding, and we were talking a little bit before we hit record on how I'm doing a lot of reading right now. I'm getting back into the defense world, so I'm reading up on some of the specs of the things that we're going to be designing, and I had kind of forgotten how detailed all this was, but it's cool. Other than just my eyes kind of bugging out by the end of the day, it's been a great experience so far. Great company, good people. So I'm happy and excited to move forward.
Just finish your MBA. You thought you were done with reading for a while?
Oh, no.
Nope. So cool. Today there was a concept or a topic that has been jangling around in my mind that I wanted to talk about. And it's this idea or concept of maintaining a standard, whether that standard is the standard that you hold yourself to or collectively within a team. I guess I'm going to kick this over to you, Dan. Firstly, how would you define what a standard is? And secondly, what does maintaining a standard look like?
Standards are an interesting thing to talk about for me because I always view them as the minimal acceptable performance level. Whatever you're defining, whether it's work or school or home or fitness or whatever, the standard is the minimum acceptable level that you'd consider success at. So let's say fitness, just for instance, right? The standard might be a certain multiple of your body weight on deadlift or a certain multiple of your body weight on bench. It might be a certain weight or a certain mile time or a certain time that you run a mile in. That is a standard. Anything above that achieves success. Anything better than that achieves success. But anything below that would be considered failure. And, we set standards in all different levels and areas in our life, right? I mentioned a few there with fitness, but we can have, a simple standard at work is being there on time. A simple standard at home is, the expectation that you have for your kids to do certain chores on a weekly, daily basis or whatever it is. So the standard to me is the idea of a minimum level of performance that is considered success or is considered acceptable.
So always kind of like a benchmark.
Yeah, I view, and maybe it's the engineering in me, but benchmark to me can sometimes also mean we ran a test. This is the result we got. That's our benchmark. It's not so much a pass-fail thing, but it's just, hey, what does this system, how does this system perform? That's our benchmark. And then if we change something, how does that compare to the benchmark? So to me, there's a difference.
Good. That was a good distinction. So when you were talking about that, the first thing that came to my mind was, we're talking about a benchmark. But ultimately, I agree with you in that standard is the minimum expected performance of yourself. You think of the standards that we establish in a team dynamic. And the thing that I'm always drawn to is this idea of, what if there were no standards? What if you did not set a minimum standard for yourself? This minimum achievable, desirable result. What's going to happen? And the results, if you look at them, quite frankly, can be devastating. If you let yourself off the hook, if you don't set a standard for yourself, you're going to be failing in multiple areas of your life, whether that's in your marriage, whether that's in your career, whether that's in your physical condition, your emotional condition. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't allow yourself to have a minimum threshold that you are striving to maintain and hopefully exceed and build upon, you're going to fail. And all too often, we're surrounded by men who don't set standards for themselves. Guys who are okay not taking care of themselves physically. Guys who are okay working that dead-end $17 an hour call center job for years on end without any desire for advancement. Guys who have failing marriages but are okay continually stepping out on their wives. We're surrounded by this stuff. And I guess the question becomes, and I'm going to go back to you, Dan, I'm going to go back to the well. Why do men not set standards for themselves? Why do men allow themselves to just quite simply fail in some of these basics in life?
I'm going to argue with you here a little bit.
Good.
You just asked, why do men fail?
Okay.
Those men aren't failing. Those men have incredibly low standards.
Okay.
They have set the bar so low that basically any action is acceptable to them. Most of those men are not trying and failing, which would be, there's a standard out there, I'm reaching for it, I'm not making it. Most of those guys have basically set the standard, their expectation, at the lowest possible level and are just, for lack of a better word, living and making choices willy-nilly and not caring about setting a standard that's going to pull them up and move them forward.
So, for example, you're saying that their standard is, I got through today.
Yeah, more or less, right? The guy who sits on his couch and eats Doritos and watches Netflix all night, right? His standard is not, I'm going to be some semblance of fit, wherever that lines up on his scale. It's, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. And that's my day. The guy who steps out on his wife, his standard is not, I'm going to be monogamous and respect the sanctity of marriage. His standard is, I'm going to get laid today one way or the other. They don't consciously think about it. That's the difference. And that's where maybe we could have a little bit of gray area here of discussion, but they're not consciously setting that standard. Whereas other guys may say, okay, my standard is I'm not going to step out on my wife. Anything below that is a failure. My standard is I'm not going to allow myself to eat processed food. Anything below that is a failure. My standard is I'm going to work my 40 hours a week and I'm going to be on time and I'm going to punch in and punch out when I'm supposed to. That's my standard. Anything below that is a failure, right? The guys who are performing at these low levels have subconsciously basically set their standards, quote unquote, to zero or right above zero.
I like that. That's a great way of looking at it. And truth be told, you're right. Like there is a standard there.
Because they're not viewing it as failure.
Yeah.
If they're not viewing it as failure, then they have achieved their standard. You can only fail if you define a standard and you don't make it.
Yeah. And that manifests itself in a certain level of contentment that you'll see in some of these men. Yeah, they're not aspiring to much, but they're achieving what they're setting out to achieve.
I would use the word apathy over contentment, but yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, okay. Apathy. I like that as well. That's a better word to describe it. Apathetic men who are simply skating by. That begs the question, what distinguishes that man from a man who has a higher standard?
Men who have a standard.
Or a standard.
Right, a standard. Men who, well, again, we just established that those men do have a standard, so
you'll concede that one.
Men who have set a standard above zero, let's say.
Okay.
Right? Those men have some level of drive in their life. They have some level of desire to be better or to at least not be quote unquote bad. They have some desire to live a life of quality at some point, right? I mean, we'll go back to the marriage thing because that's a real easy one, right? It's black and white, right? You step out on your wife or you don't, right? That to me is like the minimum standard in marriage. We can get into the whole porn thing and whatever, and whether that's infidelity or whatever. But if you physically go outside the bounds of marriage, that is a failure in marriage. Yet there's a lot of guys who don't feel like they failed if they did that. They just say, "Hey, that's me. That's what's going on. She's a bitch. She's not giving me what I want, so I'm going to go find it elsewhere."
Yeah.
Right. But that's not a man who respects himself. He obviously doesn't respect his wife. But forget the wife part, right? If you don't have the ability to set some kind of minimum performance level, you don't respect yourself, right? The guy who lets himself get to be 400 or 500 pounds, I feel for those guys because it's a long road ahead of them. But at a certain point, like, do you respect yourself? Do you really respect yourself? Because at one point you were not 400 or 500 pounds. You were 300 pounds, 250 pounds, and you were going downhill fast. At that point, you still had a chance to really say, hey, listen, I respect myself too much, so I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah.
So it comes down to a little bit of self-respect. It comes down to a little bit of integrity, and it comes down to a little bit of, a lot of what we talk about here is striving to be a better man. So the better you want to be, the higher your standard is going to be. because your minimum level of performance needs to be that high to achieve what you're looking for. If you just want to get by but be okay, your standard is going to be somewhere in the middle. And if you basically just don't give a damn, you're down at zero.
If you want to have a C plus life, you can set a standard to achieve that.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where, a lot of men will look at themselves in the mirror and they're going to want more. Not every guy. Some guys are okay with the apathy, mailing in, half-assing it. Although deep down, I don't know if they truly are. They tell themselves that they are, but I don't know if that's really the case.
Well, that's a bigger conversation for
right?
sure.
But that's a much larger conversation we'd have to tackle another day. But ultimately, most men want to be better than a C+. They want to get to that A level. They don't know how, right? Like going from trying to create a standard to hit a C+ life, that takes work. That takes a lot of focused, diligent work. The bare minimum to achieve that means you're taking care of yourself physically. You show up as a husband and as a father. Like those are things just to get you to a normal level. To be exceptional, it requires sacrifices that many men just, quite frankly, aren't necessarily willing to make. So you have to make a decision in your life. Where does that standard lie? Am I okay being apathetic, mailing it in, and settling for a D? Do I want to push myself a little bit and get to that C or that C+, or do I really want to stretch and push myself past these preconceived limits that I've set for myself to really strive for that A life?
Right.
And here's the thing with standards that I truly believe. I believe that if you really ever want to strive for that level, if you want to get to an A, you want to get to an A, whatever that looks like, you can't do it alone. Standards are something that, on an individual level, we can set for ourselves and really strive for. But I think where the power of a standard lies is within a collective group, whether that's a team at work, whether that's a group of friends. As we talk about often, we revisit the concept of constantly. What does that standard look like within your band of brothers, within your pack? Are you guys okay being apathetic, having that low standard, being pieces of shit? Or does that standard sit high enough that you're constantly pushing each other? And if guys are falling off the wagon, you are there in their face to help them get back to that standard.
It's a really interesting concept in that I believe a lot of men develop their standards based upon the men that they surround themselves with. Right? We talk so much about how important the pack is, right? Part of the reason that pack is so important is because of the level that those men are either going to let you slip to or raise you up to, force you to get yourself up to. I think about our group of friends and what we talk about and how we go. And it's amazing how much over the years we've one-upped each other to the point where our standard, you think about it, right? Think about the last 3 or 4 years. Our standards have increased collectively in our group just by being around each other and just by everyone kind of improving slightly here and there and here and there. And all of a sudden, our standards are higher than they were when we started. And it wasn't even a conscious decision so much as hey, I see Brad's doing this. That's a really cool idea. I'm going to work on getting up to his level there. Oh, Dan's doing this. I'm going to bump myself up and see if I can achieve, something like what he's doing. Oh, Dave's doing this. Cam's doing that. Andy's doing this. And we all kind of just slowly climb that ladder, setting those new standards. And the cool thing about standards too is sometimes you're working to achieve the standard. You're not there yet, but it's like a goal. It's an objective as opposed to a minimum effort.
Yeah.
And once you get there and once you maintain that standard for a long time, you go, hey, I can do better than that. Hey, the standard was benching 315 for 3 reps. Maybe the standard is going to be 315 for 5 reps now, or 330 for 3 reps, or whatever it is. But you get to a point where you're like, hey, that standard is now just life. Like I don't even have to work to maintain it. So I'm going to push a little bit more. But to the point earlier, right? There's guys who like that, and there's guys who don't want to push. Or you brought up a good point before too. I believe that every guy wants to be better than they are. I think the work involved to get there scares a lot of guys away.
Absolutely.
Right? I truly don't believe in a dark corner by themselves. Those guys are going, I'm okay being, that DC guy. I want to be that AB guy. But the work to get from where I'm at to where I need to be is too much. So I'm just going to pretend that I'm okay living in this realm, because there's also a fear of failure that presents itself there.
I think about that. Guys get scared, and it's really easy to be like, I'm here, I want to get there. The work to get there looks daunting. It looks intimidating. It looks impossible. I'm actually going to use an example of one of the guys in our crew, repeat podcast guest, Andy. And I was looking, Andy, for anybody who knows Andy, he posts a lot on Instagram. And I mean a lot. A lot. He posted something fairly recently. I can't remember if it was around the time of his wedding or right after his diagnosis, when he was kind of porky.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right?
Yeah.
And you look at Andy now, and Andy's over here constantly, every day on Instagram, he's posting videos slinging kettlebells or maces, setting these reels to heavy metal. Just, his videos crack me up. But here's the thing. Andy's turned himself into an absolute monster. He's an absolute physical specimen despite being 5'3". He's a beast. And yes, Andy, you are 5'3". But here's the thing. That Andy there, who was overweight, was not taking care of himself. There's no way he could have looked at Andy from today and said, that's me. But you know what got him there? The Andy that we knew when he first joined our team physically is not what the Andy today is. He joined our group. That standard helped lift him up. He helped continue to set that standard and raise that standard, much like you were talking about. Started slinging kettlebells and swinging maces and raising hell, and look at him now. He took the necessary steps to get himself to a higher level that is continually raised and raised and raised. That standard is not a set thing. It is not a in-stone thing whatsoever. It's a consistently moving needle that points upward. That trajectory continues upward and upward. And he's done that daily. And he's inspired the absolute hell out of me. Every time I watch one of those damn videos, all I want to do is just start swinging a kettlebell.
Yep. Yeah, you bring up a great point. He defines the idea of resetting your standard. Because I truly believe every day he goes out and his standard increments up just a little bit every single day, and there are days he'll come out and he'll tell you there are days where he doesn't meet his standard, and you know what? He just keeps working back at it. And he's so incredibly inspirational to watch, because you're right. Even, he was that picture that he put up when he first got diagnosed. He was definitely not the Andy that joined our group. And the Andy that joined our group is not the Andy that is on fire today.
Yeah.
So he has been working this whole time to better himself, to transform himself. And, we're giving Andy a lot of credit for his physical change. The changes that I've seen in him as a man, in his ability to be a father, in his ability to be a husband, in his ability to run his business, in his ability to do deep thinking. We're blowing a lot of sunshine up his skirt right now, but he has evolved because he sets standards, he achieves them, he finds a way to make those commonplace, and then sets new standards and achieves.
And what happens to the group around him? They want to raise their standard to match that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole idea of, a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Exactly. And here, on the other hand, if there are other guys in our group that are struggling, what's interesting is as the standard continually is being raised and lifted up, it becomes that much more apparent and that much more obvious when somebody's struggling, when they're not meeting the standards that they've set for themselves. It's that much easier to have a conversation with them about that.
Yep. And the opposite is true too. So I run with a group of guys here locally, a bunch of dads who they're good guys, but they're not driven guys. They like to have a good time. They like to drink. They like to, just hang out and party and whatever. And I'm always amazed at how by the end of my time with them, I'm physically fighting myself to not bring my standard down. It's not to say like I'm not going to have a beer with them or anything, but like I don't need to get wrecked anymore with them. But there's still a part of me, even this past weekend, I was out with them. And it's like, the standard is so much lower that, well, so why shouldn't I do that? It comes down to peer pressure, right? This is really what we're talking about in glorified terms, is peer pressure. Peer pressure can be a good thing. Peer pressure can be a bad thing. But it's amazing to me how the different groups that you run with can almost conflict. Not almost, can conflict. So like I'm sitting with these dads, and Saturday night I'm actually thinking, I'm like, if I fall in line with them, I fall out of line with you guys. So now I'm the guy in the dad group who doesn't drink and gets harassed for not drinking. Not, and it's not like I'll have a drink here and there, but it's, like I'm not going to just go out and slam tequila all night. Like it's not my thing anymore. Whereas a lot of these guys will. And it's just, it amazes me how that making your surroundings adhere to your standards is very, very important. They can pull you up, they can pull you down.
Comes back to the old Jim Rohn quote where you were the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's so, I experienced that very much this past week.
But it's true. Like, you will surround yourself with men. What are those men doing? Is that in line with what you want from yourself?
Yep.
Yeah, I understand the same concept. I have friends who are a lot of fun to hang out with, right? Like, we get together, we have a good time. We don't drink, so we do other stuff, but we still have a good time. And I look at them, and there's some things in their lives where we're not on the same level, right? Like, they're not as focused on being the husbands that they need to be. They might not be as focused on taking care of themselves physically or spiritually. Those things matter.
Yeah.
And when I look for the people that I want to spend my time with, I have to spend my time with the guys who are going to make me want to be better, who maintain a standard. So I keep finding myself gravitating toward always wanting to talk to you guys, our group. It's because you guys, I see it in each of you. You guys make me want to be better. And as that happens, I know that I can get myself to a place as my standard raises that I'll hopefully do the same for you.
Well, think about it, right? We've got this, I don't know if we've mentioned it on here, but we've got a trip coming up here in a couple weeks, right? We're getting together, me, you, Andy, a bunch of other guys, and we're going to hang out for the weekend. How much, and we're not just going to hang out and bullshit, we're going to do stuff.
Hard stuff.
Looking forward to that because you know that standard will be raised that weekend. You know that as a man, that's a weekend that you're going to invest in yourself. You're going to invest in the group that you're with, and you're going to improve. You're going to become that better man.
Yeah.
Because the standard is so high. Yeah, we were joking around today because we're going to do like workouts every morning when we're there, and Andy was busting my chops today about the workout in the morning, and I told him, I said, hey, listen, I said it might be hard, and I might not be the guy in the front. I said, but I'm going to be too dumb to quit. So let's go. And that is literally just because I know the guys I'm around, and I know that, quitting is just not an option with those guys.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. It's just like, that's the standard. You will finish this. You'll work hard. I love that.
You might be down on hands and knees gagging because you want to throw up, but you're not going to quit.
No.
Because you know that that's not an option. One, because we'll give you hell if you don't. But two, the standard is such that failure, quitting, throwing in the towel, that's not going to cut it.
Yeah. It's having a standard in anything you do is important. Setting a standard to the point where I look at it this way. A standard should be something that in general you're going to meet, but it's not a given. We want to start to give guys a little bit of guidance or some tactical advice here, right? So how do you set a standard, right? One of the best ways to do it, in my opinion, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say, is to find one that you feel comfortable that you can meet, but is not a given. Like, it's not something you should be able to do in your sleep, but it's something that you should feel confident you can hit. So let's say, I'm just going to go back to lifting because it's easy and I'm looking at my gym right now. Let's say you're gonna start a deadlift workout, and that you can get X percent or X times your body weight in deadlifts. Let's say 1.5 times your weight for 3 reps in deadlifts. That should be your standard. But you also know that on a bad day, you might not hit that. That's where you should be setting your standard. It shouldn't be, well, I can get 1.5, so I'm going to set it at 1.3 because I know I'll win every day. No, set it at 1.5. Realize that you've got to put some work in to make sure that you hit that standard and hit that standard. Once that 1.5 feels like the 1.3 feels, now you go up to 1.7, right? And I'm picking arbitrary numbers, obviously, but you guys get the idea where it's like, you got to set that standard and then you got to reevaluate it once it becomes the norm and reset it and raise it.
Yeah, you're on the right track. And I would actually distill it down just a little bit more in terms of what you're trying to identify. It should scare you or intimidate you a little bit, but you feel like you can achieve it. They're all there. We've all run into situations before where we all talk about stretch goals. Talk about that in work. You talk about that in your personal life. A lot of people set some pussy stretch goals, for lack of a better word. If you're actually pushing yourself. It should scare you a little bit. It should intimidate you a little bit. It should put a little bit of fear in you.
Yep.
But you can look at it and say, I can do it. That's where you start.
Are you using the term stretch goal and standard interchangeably?
No. I was using kind of the business nomenclature terminology.
Because I was going to say, I would argue that there's a standard and then there's a stretch goal. It's kind of like anybody who's done any kind of contracting or specification writing knows that there's shall and should requirements, right? The shall requirements are the bare minimum of what it should, the thing will do. And the should requirements is kind of the wish list part. That's your standard and your stretch goal.
If your standard is X and you're shooting for Y, I don't want to use the term stretch goal interchangeably. That was just an example of what people have heard before, right? But if my goal is Y, it needs to feel a little uncomfortable.
Yep, absolutely.
Freaks me out a little bit, stresses me out a little bit, but I know I can do it.
Yep.
And the other key that I can't emphasize this enough, guys, we come back to this every episode. We'll continue coming back to this every episode. Find somebody or somebody's plural that you can use and create, a tribe, a pack, accountability partner to hold you to that standard. Because if you continually try to do it alone, you might be able to achieve certain benchmarks. That standard might be raised a little bit, but to really get where you want to go, you're just not going to be able to do it alone. It's not possible. You can get yourself to point X, but if you really want to get to the top of the mountain, you can't do it alone. So seek out individuals that you can maintain a standard with.
Yeah, it definitely helps. Listen, there are the rare few lone wolves who can white knuckle it.
Yeah.
Chances are that's not you. It's not me.
It's not me.
I don't think it's you.
Oh.
Right? Chances are it's not anybody listening. I'm sure maybe one or two, but having a pack will definitely help you maintain that standard and hit those goals.
Short and sweet. Love it.
That's it. Hope you guys are working towards it. What I'd like you guys to do actually is hit us up on Instagram and let us know what standards you set for yourself. I'd love to see some of the standards that guys are setting in their lives. So, it's Untaming Masculinity on Instagram, or you can hit up Untaming_Dan on Instagram as well. Brad, what's yours?
It's Untamed Silverback.
Untamed Silverback. That's right. So hit us up. Let us know what's going on. We'd love to hear from you guys as far as what standards you're setting for yourselves and what reach goals and how you're using the two to work together. So, thanks again for listening. Make sure you're checking us out on the website, untamingmasculinity.com. You can find these show notes for this episode and for all of our other episodes, as well as links to the social media I just mentioned. Please make sure you're going and giving us ratings and reviews. We've been checking in. People are doing this here and there, but we really appreciate a big push right now to help us get over the hurdle that we've got in terms of reach. If we can start reaching some more men, we can start doing a lot more here. So please go 5 stars, little rating and review. It will go a long way for us. And finally, make sure you're coming back next week for some great content we've got lined up. Until then, we will leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?